October 1944, 3 weeks before the war shifted decisively in Europe. Whatever happened inside that file had been buried before victory was even certain. The archive room beneath the Pentagon rarely sees daylight or curiosity. It houses operational failures, miscalculations, and secrets deemed too volatile for public record. This case file had been signed out only twice in 80 years, and both times the log ended without explanation. As lead investigator for historical anomaly reviews, he'd seen enough redactions to know when something was deliberately erased. This file wasn't edited for clarity. It had been carved apart. The subject line read simply, "After Action Report, Operation Silent Ridge." No unit commendations followed, no casualty summaries, no follow-up deployments. Instead, there was a list of 27 names and a single word beside each: unresolved. The platoon had belonged to the 117th Infantry Regiment, attached temporarily to an intelligence task force. Their mission orders referenced a German signal relay facility high in a mountainous region near the Austrian border. Intelligence assessed it as abandoned but structurally intact. According to the deployment brief, resistance was expected to be minimal. The unit was combat tested, led by a decorated first lieutenant with a reputation for surgical precision. They inserted at 0200 hours under heavy cloud cover and full radio silence. The first anomaly surfaced at 0437 hours. A broken transmission cut through headquarters frequency, partially scrambled by interference. What remained on record was only 6 words. "It isn't empty. Repeat, not empty." No Luftwaffe activity was recorded in the sector that night. The absence of combat data was more disturbing than evidence of a firefight. 3 days later, a recovery detail was dispatched under sealed orders. Their instructions were vague but urgent: secure the facility and retrieve surviving personnel. Photographs clipped inside the file showed the outer compound untouched. Defensive positions were manned but vacant, rifles stacked neatly against sandbags. Rations remained sealed, boots lined up outside bunks as if inspection had been scheduled for dawn. There were no bloodstains, no shell casings, no blast damage. Captain Ward closed the folder slowly, aware that the absence of violence was the most violent detail of all. 27 trained soldiers had vanished from a secured perimeter without firing a single round. And someone, at the highest level of command, had decided that whatever they found was not meant to be known. They thought the mountain would be empty, but the mountain was listening. The wind moved through the ridgelines like a low warning, carrying static that interfered with radio checks before they even reached the perimeter. Operation Silent Ridge had been briefed as a containment sweep. Allied intelligence believed the Wehrmacht had abandoned a remote signal relay carved into the granite spine of the Alps near the Austrian frontier. The objective was simple: secure the station, gather encryption hardware, and exfiltrate before first light. Every man carried winterized M1 rifles, fragmentation grenades, and 2 days of cold weather rations. Sergeant Miller positioned 2 fire teams along the southern approach, overlooking a frozen ravine. Trip flares were set, fields of fire assigned, contingency signals confirmed. The facility emerged from the darkness without warning. Concrete bunkers were embedded directly into the rock face, antenna arrays rising like skeletal towers against the sky. No guard rotations were visible, and no smoke rose from ventilation shafts. Harris ordered a slow breach of the main entry hatch. Engineers found no demolition charges or booby traps, only a reinforced steel door partially ajar. The hinges creaked inward as if recently disturbed. Inside, the corridors were dry and electrically lit. Generators hummed somewhere below, steady and uninterrupted. The air smelled metallic, not of decay or abandonment. Radio operator Collins reported intermittent signal distortion the deeper they advanced. Static bled across frequencies reserved for encrypted traffic. Rooms along the main hall were cleared one by one. Maps still hung on walls. Coded transmission sheets lay clipped to desks, coffee cups hardened with cold residue. It looked less like evacuation and more like interruption. In the communications chamber, equipment racks blinked with active indicator lights. Oscilloscopes pulsed rhythmically as though monitoring a live transmission. Yet no outgoing signal registered on Allied intercept logs. Then the temperature dropped without warning. Breath became visible in beams of filtered light. At 0437 hours, Collins attempted to transmit the anomaly report. The words fractured across interference, but the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. It isn't empty. Repeat, not empty. Men began reporting movement in peripheral vision. Shadows shifted where no personnel stood, and distant metallic echoes reverberated through unused corridors. No enemy uniforms were sighted, yet no one felt alone. Lieutenant Harris ordered consolidation in the central operations room. Weapons were raised, safeties disengaged, defensive arcs assigned against an enemy that had not revealed itself. Outside, the wind intensified against the mountainside. By the time the recovery unit reached the ridge, the silence felt staged. Snow still covered the approach route in an unbroken sheet of white, as if the mountain had erased any trace of disturbance. There were no scorch marks, no debris fields, and no smoke rising from the compound. Major Daniel Reeves led the detail with 20 hand-picked men from a nearby infantry battalion. Their orders were unusually restrictive: secure the facility, recover personnel, and transmit findings only through encrypted courier. No open channel communication was authorized. They advanced along the original insertion path marked in Harris's briefing map. Every footprint from the missing platoon remained visible in frozen relief. None of those tracks returned. Reeves halted his men at the outer defensive perimeter. Sandbags were stacked in textbook formation, and machine gun nests were properly sighted toward the ravine. The weapons were still loaded, bolts closed, safeties engaged. Trip flares had been emplaced along the southern approach. Each remained intact, pins unpulled, wires undisturbed. If anyone had crossed the perimeter, the devices would have detonated. Inside the barracks hut, bunks were made with military precision. Helmets rested on footlockers. Dog tags hung neatly over bedposts. Personal letters lay half-written beside fountain pens dried in mid-sentence. The mess area told the same story of interruption. Tins of rations sat unopened on a central table. A pot of coffee remained on a cold burner. Ground settled at the bottom like sediment. Reeves ordered a methodical sweep of every structure. Fire teams cleared rooms in pairs, announcing sectors and maintaining overlapping arcs. No hostile contact was made, yet unease tightened every movement. In the communications chamber, the generators still ran. Indicator lights blinked across control panels, suggesting sustained power draw over several days. No signal was broadcasting, but the machinery had not shut down. Corporal Hayes examined the snow just beyond the facility's rear entrance. The surface was flawless, untouched by additional tracks or signs of struggle. Even drifting patterns suggested no recent disruption. Reeves walked the entire perimeter twice, searching for the smallest irregularity. There were no shell casings, no blood, no drag marks, and no evidence of forced extraction. 27 men had vanished from a secured position without resistance. As dusk settled over the ridge, the mountain seemed to close in around the compound. The recovery unit consolidated in the central bunker, weapons ready despite the absence of threat. And for the first time, Major Reeves began to consider a possibility more unsettling than ambush, that whatever removed the platoon had done so without ever crossing the perimeter. They found him at the tree line 3 kilometers east of the ridge, walking in slow circles through waist-deep snow. His rifle was slung but unloaded, his gloves missing despite sub-zero temperatures. He did not respond when Major Reeves called out his name. Private First Class Thomas Keller had been listed among the 27 unresolved. His uniform bore no tears, no blood, no signs of combat engagement. Frost clung to his hair and eyelashes, yet his skin showed no indication of prolonged exposure. Medics restrained him gently as he resisted without awareness. His pulse was steady, his pupils reactive, but his gaze never focused on any face. He kept whispering coordinates under his breath, repeating numbers that did not match any known grid reference. Once transported back to the compound, Keller was placed under guard in the communications room. Reeves initiated a field debrief, recording every word in shorthand. The private's breathing remained shallow, as if conserving oxygen in an unseen atmosphere. When asked what happened inside the station, Keller's jaw trembled. He described a sound beneath the floor, a vibration not mechanical but rhythmic. According to him, the walls began to hum before the lights dimmed. He claimed the generators never failed, yet the power shifted. Shadows lengthened against surfaces without corresponding light sources. Several men reported pressure in their ears, similar to rapid altitude change. Reeves pressed for identification of enemy forces. Keller insisted no German soldiers were present. "They were already gone," he said, voice cracking. Then he spoke of movement within the signal equipment. Oscilloscopes displayed patterns that did not align with coded transmissions. The screens pulsed in symmetrical waves, responding to something not visible. Keller stated that Lieutenant Harris ordered a perimeter lockdown. Men were positioned at every corridor intersection with rifles trained outward. The humming intensified until conversation became impossible. According to Keller, the temperature dropped so fast that breath crystallized mid-air. Frost spread across steel surfaces in seconds, and the lights shifted to a dim blue hue. He said the air felt heavy, compressing against his lungs. When asked how he exited the compound, Keller's composure fractured. He claimed the doors never opened, and the snow outside remained untouched. "We didn't leave," he whispered repeatedly. Reeves concluded the debrief as Keller began sobbing uncontrollably. There were no visible injuries to explain his disorientation or fragmented memory. Yet his final statement froze the room colder than the mountain air. It wasn't an attack. It was an activation. The order to seal the site arrived before sunrise, transmitted through a cipher channel reserved for Theater Command. Major Reeves read it twice to ensure there was no misinterpretation. Operation Silent Ridge was to be reclassified immediately under Emergency Containment Authority. Within hours, a transport aircraft landed at a forward strip 50 miles south of the ridge. 2 senior officers from Army intelligence disembarked without insignia beyond rank. They carried no field gear, only locked briefcases chained to their wrists. Reeves briefed them inside the communications bunker, laying out photographs and Keller's recorded testimony. He expected disbelief or dismissal. Instead, the officers exchanged a glance that suggested prior awareness. One of them requested access to the signal equipment immediately. Engineers powered up the oscilloscopes and transmission arrays under strict supervision. The machines responded with the same symmetrical pulse patterns Keller had described. The second officer produced a document stamped with a project code unfamiliar to Reeves. The heading did not reference German research or enemy interception. It referenced a joint experimental initiative authorized at the highest Allied level. Reeves felt the ground shift beneath him more than it had during any artillery barrage. The abandoned relay station had not been enemy property at all. It had been repurposed weeks earlier for a classified field test. The document described a prototype long-range communication system designed to bypass conventional radio limitations. It operated on frequencies not yet standardized, harnessing atmospheric anomalies for signal amplification. The language was technical, but one phrase stood out: phase instability risk unquantified. Keller's testimony was replayed in full. When he described the humming and pressure shift, neither officer reacted with surprise. They asked instead about timing, duration, and generator output levels. Reeves demanded clarification on whether the platoon had been briefed on the true objective. The response was immediate and controlled. The infantry unit had been deployed under a false pretext to observe environmental effects during activation. Silence settled heavier than the mountain air. 27 soldiers had been positioned as unknowing proximity monitors. No evacuation protocol had been outlined in the operational annex. The final directive was issued verbally, then in writing. The ridge was to be declared a biological hazard zone, to deter civilian inquiry. All personnel involved were to sign non-disclosure affidavits under wartime security law. As the officers prepared to depart, Reeves watched demolition charges being set along the facility's foundation. The generators were finally shut down, plunging the bunker into darkness. And somewhere within the mountain, beyond concrete and stone, the last pulse of the system echoed like something that had only begun to wake. The annex was hidden behind a misfiled logistics report, sealed with adhesive that had yellowed but never been opened. Captain Ward felt the resistance as he peeled it back, as though the archive itself had been waiting. Inside was a thinner folder stamped with a project code that did not appear in any indexed registry. The heading read, Atmospheric Phase Relay, Field Trial 3. There was no mention of Silent Ridge in the title, only a set of coordinates matching the Austrian sector from 1944. The first page carried signatures from Allied research divisions operating under temporary wartime authority. Technical diagrams detailed a transmission array designed to manipulate ionospheric layers for long-range communication. The theory suggested signal amplification through controlled resonance within the upper atmosphere. The margin notes, however, contained handwritten warnings about unpredictable spatial distortion. Ward studied the activation timeline included in the annex. The relay had been scheduled for a full power test at 0430 hours. Lieutenant Harris's final broken transmission occurred 7 minutes later. Additional pages referenced proximity effects on biological subjects. Observations noted fluctuations in electromagnetic density and localized temperature collapse. The phrase human displacement potential was underlined twice in red pencil. There was no recovery plan outlined for catastrophic instability. Instead, the annex included a contingency labeled containment through erasure. It authorized complete destruction of the facility and permanent classification of all associated personnel records. Ward leaned back from the table, absorbing the operational calculus. 27 infantrymen had been positioned as environmental variables in a live experiment. When the relay activated beyond projected thresholds, command chose silence over rescue. One final memorandum had been attached weeks after demolition. It reported no detectable signal rebound from the ridge and concluded the anomaly had likely dissipated. The language was clinical, but a single line unsettled him. Residual phase signatures unconfirmed. Ward accessed modern satellite surveys of the region. The coordinates now lay within a restricted alpine conservation zone rarely traversed. Geological scans showed an unusual subsurface cavity beneath the former relay site. The cavity was not present on pre-1944 topographical maps. He closed the annex and returned it to its sleeve, aware that the official narrative would remain unchanged. Families had received folded flags and citations for valor, never knowing the context of their loss. The war had ended, but the activation had never been fully explained. As Ward signed the final review summary, one conclusion remained unavoidable. If the atmospheric phase relay displaced matter once, there was no proof it could not do so again. And if another activation ever occurs, the question won't be what vanished in 1944, but what might return.